a shattered tail light, a flashing siren on a deserted highway. What started as a routine traffic stop for a decorated black veteran quickly spiraled into a nightmare of abuse and prejudice. But these arrogant officers made one fatal mistake. They had no idea they just handcuffed a 4-star general. General David Carter was a man who appreciated the quiet. After 38 years of active duty in the United States Army, with combat tours stretching from the dusty streets of Mogadishu to the treacherous mountains of the Korangal Valley, silence was a luxury he rarely afforded himself. On this particular Tuesday evening, David was enjoying precisely that. Dressed in a faded grey flannel shirt, worn denim jeans, and a scuffed pair of work boots, he looked nothing like the commander of hundreds of thousands of troops. He looked like a tired man driving home. He was behind the wheel of his late father's 1998 Ford F-150. He had a fleet of armored SUVs and a security detail at his disposal in Washington. But when he visited his childhood home in the neighboring state, he preferred the old truck. It smelled of motor oil, old leather, and nostalgia. His route took him through Crestview, an affluent, predominantly white suburb known for its manicured lawns, gated driveways, and a police department that prided itself on keeping outsiders out. It was a town that existed in a bubble of its own making, fiercely protective of its borders, and deeply suspicious of anyone who didn't fit the local demographic. At 9:45 p.m., the roads were mostly empty. David was cruising exactly at the posted speed limit of 35 miles per hour. He wasn't swerving. He wasn't distracted. He was simply existing in a space where 2 patrol officers decided he didn't belong. Sitting in a marked cruiser, tucked behind a cluster of oak trees at the edge of the town limits, were Officer Mitchell Hayes and Officer Ryan Jenkins. Hayes was 26, a former high school football player whose aggressive insecurity was barely masked by his badge. Jenkins, 45, was a cynical veteran of the force who had long ago traded his ideals for a comfortable pension, perfectly willing to turn a blind eye to his younger partner's reckless tendencies. "Look at this guy," Hayes muttered, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel as David's old Ford rumbled past. "Beat-up truck, out-of-state plates. Doesn't belong around here, especially not him." "Probably just passing through to the interstate, Mitch," Jenkins said lazily, taking a sip from his thermal coffee mug. "Or he's casing the neighborhood," Hayes countered, his jaw set. "A lot of burglaries in the North End lately." There hadn't been a burglary in Crestview in 6 months, but Hayes didn't let facts interfere with his prejudices. He slammed the cruiser into drive and pulled out, the engine roaring as he accelerated to tailgate the old pickup. In the rearview mirror, David saw the cruiser approach rapidly and ride his bumper. His heart rate didn't elevate. He had stared down warlords and negotiated with hostile foreign dignitaries. A tailgating cop was a minor nuisance. He maintained his speed, keeping his hands loosely draped over the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 positions. For 2 miles, Hayes followed him, waiting for a mistake. A failure to signal, a drift over the yellow line. But David drove with military precision. Frustrated, Hayes finally snapped. "I'm pulling him." "Taillights dim," Hayes declared, though the light was perfectly functional. He flicked the switch. The night exploded in red and blue strobes. David let out a slow, measured breath. He signaled, smoothly pulling the truck over to the shoulder of the road, placing the vehicle in park, turning off the engine, and rolling down his window. He placed his hands flat on the steering wheel, illuminated by the harsh glow of the police spotlight shining directly into his side mirror. In his mind, David ran through the protocol. He knew the statistics. He knew what happened to black men during routine traffic stops, regardless of their age, their profession, or their innocence. He braced himself, locking away his pride and bringing forth the stoic discipline that had earned him 4 stars on his collar. Hayes approached the driver's side window, his right hand resting intentionally on the butt of his service weapon. It was an intimidation tactic, pure and simple. Jenkins hung back near the rear bumper, shining his flashlight into the empty bed of the truck. "License, registration, and pool proof of insurance. Now!" Hayes barked, leaning in close. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't state the reason for the stop. His tone was drenched in unearned authority and dripping with contempt. "Good evening, officer," David replied, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that naturally commanded respect. "My license is in my wallet, which is in my back right pocket. My registration and insurance are in the glove compartment. How would you like me to proceed?" Hayes narrowed his eyes, clearly agitated by David's calm, articulate demeanor. It wasn't the fearful stammering he was accustomed to extracting from people he intimidated. "I said, give me your papers, boy. Are you deaf?" David's jaw tightened infinitesimally at the word boy. He was 61 years old. He commanded the absolute respect of the President of the United States. But here, on this dark stretch of asphalt, he was just a target. "I will reach for the glove compartment first," David said evenly, moving slowly. "Keep your hands on the wheel," Hayes shouted, stepping back and unsnapping his holster. "I didn't tell you to reach for anything." "Officer, you asked for my registration," David pointed out, his voice remaining level. "It is in the glove compartment. I cannot retrieve it with my hands on the wheel." "Don't get smart with me," Hayes spat, his face flushing red under the streetlights. "Step out of the vehicle. Do it now." "Is there a problem, officer?" David asked. "Why am I being ordered out of my vehicle?" "Because I said so. Step out, or I will drag you out." Jenkins finally stepped forward, shining his flashlight directly into David's eyes. "Just do what he says, buddy. Don't make this hard on yourself." With a silent sigh, David unbuckled his seatbelt with deliberate slowness. He opened the heavy door of the Ford and stepped out into the cool night air. He stood at his full height, 6'2", and squared his shoulders. Even in a worn flannel shirt, David Carter cut an imposing figure. His posture was ramrod straight, his gaze piercing. For a fraction of a second, Hayes hesitated, instinctively intimidated by the sheer presence of the man standing before him. But his fragile ego quickly overrode his instinct. "Turn around. Hands on the truck. Spread 'em," Hayes ordered. David complied, placing his palms flat against the rusted quarter panel of his father's truck. He spread his legs. He felt Hayes's hands aggressively patting down his sides, checking his ankles, moving up his waistline with unnecessary force. Hayes yanked David's wallet from his back pocket. "What's a guy like you doing driving through Crestview at night?" Hayes sneered, opening the wallet and pulling out David's civilian driver's license. "I'm driving home to Washington," David answered. "Washington?" Jenkins scoffed from behind. "Long drive for a guy in a piece of junk like this. What do you do for work? You got a job?" "I work for the government," David said simply. It wasn't a lie. Hayes snorted, examining the civilian license. He deliberately ignored the gold-embossed veteran designation on the bottom corner. "Right. Government work. You know how many liars we get through here?" Hayes stepped back. "Put your hands behind your back." "Am I under arrest?" David asked, his voice hardening just a fraction. "You're being detained," Hayes snapped, grabbing David's left wrist and wrenching it behind his back with enough force to strain the rotator cuff. David clenched his teeth, suppressing a groan. He had taken shrapnel in that shoulder in Iraq. He wasn't about to let a local bully break it. The cold steel of handcuffs ratcheted tightly around David's wrists. The metal bit into his skin. "For what cause?" David demanded. "Suspicion of driving under the influence," Hayes lied effortlessly. "Your eyes are bloodshot, and you're acting erratic." "I have had nothing to drink, and my behavior has been entirely compliant," David stated firmly. "You are making a grave mistake, officer." Yeah. Save it for the judge," Hayes laughed, shoving David roughly toward the back of the cruiser. "Watch your head." He pushed down on David's neck, forcing him into the cramped, plastic-lined back seat of the police car. As the door slammed shut, David sat in the darkness, the smell of stale sweat and cheap disinfectant assaulting his senses. He looked through the wire mesh separating the front and back seats. He memorized their names from their badges. Hayes, Jenkins. He could have told them right then. He could have shouted his rank, demanded they call the Pentagon, or invoked the names of senators and generals who would have had these officers stripped of their badges before sunrise. But General David Carter was a tactician. He knew that revealing his hand too early would allow them to cover their tracks, to apologize and sweep their blatant prejudice under the rug. No, he needed to see exactly how deep the rot went in the Crestview Police Department. He would let them play their game, and when they finally realized who they were playing with, the game would be over. The ride to the Crestview police station was suffocatingly tense. In the front seat, Hayes and Jenkins were in high spirits, practically gloating over their catch. "Did you see the way he looked at me?" Hayes bragged, adjusting the rearview mirror to catch a glimpse of his prisoner in the back. "Thought he could talk his way out of it. Used his big, fancy vocabulary. I am entirely compliant. Give me a break." "You handled it, Mitch," Jenkins agreed lazily, scrolling through his phone. "Can't let these guys think they run the show just because they memorized a few legal words. We'll stick him in a holding cell overnight. Let him sweat. Write him up for resisting and a busted tail light, and kick him out in the morning. He won't come through our town again." In the back, David remained silent. The handcuffs were painfully tight, cutting off the circulation to his hands, but his face remained a mask of stone. He was mentally filing away every word they spoke. Conspiracy to falsely imprison, falsification of a police report, civil rights violations. The list was growing by the minute. The cruiser pulled into the back alley of the Crestview Police Department, a modern, heavily funded brick building that looked more like a corporate bank than a precinct. Hayes yanked the back door open and hauled David out by his bicep. "Move," Hayes ordered, prodding David in the back. David walked with quiet dignity through the heavy metal doors, stepping into the glaring fluorescent light of the booking area. The room was quiet. A single desk sergeant sat behind a raised counter, typing away at a computer. This was Sergeant Thomas Brady, a 20-year veteran of the force who was counting the days until his retirement. "Look what the cat dragged in," Brady remarked without looking up from his screen. "What do we got, Hayes?" "Suspicious individual, Sarge," Hayes announced proudly, pushing David toward the booking counter. "Driving a busted-up truck through the North End. Refused lawful orders. Combative. Probably casing the Miller estate." Brady finally looked up, his eyes sweeping over David. Brady was older, more observant. He noticed immediately that the man standing in handcuffs wasn't slouching. He wasn't trembling. He was standing at the position of attention, his eyes locked onto Brady with a terrifying, unblinking intensity. "Combative, huh?" Brady asked, raising an eyebrow. "He looks pretty quiet to me." "He's putting on an act now," Jenkins chimed in from the doorway. "Mitch had to use force to get him out of the vehicle." "Empty your pockets," Brady ordered, ignoring Jenkins. He looked at David. "Oh, wait, you're cuffed. Hayes, empty his pockets. Put everything in the tray." Hayes smirked and stepped up behind David. He patted down David's front pockets, pulling out a set of keys and a handful of loose change, tossing them loudly into the metal tray on the counter. Then, Hayes reached into the inner breast pocket of David's flannel shirt. His fingers brushed against something stiff. Hayes pulled out a slim, black leather ID holder. "Let's see who we're really dealing with," Hayes muttered, flipping the leather case open. Inside the case wasn't a secondary driver's license or a concealed carry permit. It was a crisp, white, heavily watermarked government identification card. A common access card. Hayes frowned, his brain struggling to process the acronyms and seals. "Department of Defense," Hayes read aloud, his voice dripping with skepticism. He scoffed. "Oh, look at this. We got ourselves a fake ID. What is this, military surplus? You trying to pull stolen valor on me, old man?" Hayes tossed the leather wallet onto the counter in front of Sergeant Brady. "Look at this garbage, Sarge. Guy claims he works for the government." Brady picked up the leather case. He adjusted his reading glasses, squinting at the small print under the glaring overhead lights. First, Brady saw the official seal of the United States Department of Defense. It wasn't a sticker. It was embedded in the plastic. Then his eyes moved to the photograph. It was the man standing in front of him, looking stern. But in the photo, he was wearing a pristine, decorated army dress uniform. Brady's eyes flicked to the name printed in bold black letters. Carter, David L. Then Brady's eyes drifted to the middle of the card, to the rank designation. Rank, General Pay Grade, O10. Brady's breath hitched in his throat. His blood ran cold. As a former Marine corporal who had served in the late 80s, Brady knew exactly what those letters and numbers meant. O10 wasn't a captain. It wasn't a colonel. It was a 4-star general, the highest attainable rank in the United States military. A man who reported directly to the Secretary of Defense and the President. A man who commanded the very fabric of the nation's armed forces. Brady's hands began to shake visibly. He slowly lowered the card and looked up at the man standing in handcuffs. David Carter met Brady's terrified gaze. David didn't smile. He simply gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, as if to say, "Yes, you are reading that correctly." "Sarge?" Hayes asked, completely oblivious to the catastrophic shift in the room's atmosphere. "What's the charge for a fake federal ID? That's a felony, right? We can lock him up for years on that." Brady didn't answer Hayes. He couldn't speak. His mouth opened and closed like a fish, suffocating on dry land. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, pale gray. "Sergeant Brady," David spoke for the first time since entering the precinct. His voice echoed off the cinder block walls, echoing with the weight of absolute authority. "I would highly advise you to tell your subordinate to remove these handcuffs immediately, before my security detachment realizes my GPS beacon has remained stationary for too long and decides to breach this building." Hayes barked a laugh. Listen to this guy. Security detachment? Who do you think you are? The president? Shut up, Brady whispered. What? Hayes looked at his sergeant, confused. Shut up! Shut your mouth, Hayes! Brady roared, suddenly exploding out of his chair. He practically leaped over the counter, fumbling desperately with his duty belt to retrieve his handcuff keys. His hands were trembling so violently, he dropped the keys on the linoleum floor. Sarge, what the hell are you doing? Jenkins demanded, stepping into the room, finally sensing that something was horribly wrong. Brady scrambled to his knees, snatched the keys and lunged behind David. Sir, I am so sorry. I am so sorry, Brady stammered, his voice cracking with sheer panic as he jammed the key into the cuffs and frantically unlocked them. The heavy metal cuffs fell away. David brought his arms forward, slowly rolling his shoulders and rubbing his chafed wrists. He turned around to face the 3 police officers. Hayes was staring at Brady as if the sergeant had lost his mind. Sarge, what are you doing? He's a suspect. Brady ignored him. He snapped to rigid attention, his right hand flying up to a crisp, perfect salute. General Carter, sir, Brady practically shouted, his eyes locked straight ahead, sweat beading on his forehead. Sergeant Thomas Brady, former United States Marine Corps. I deeply apologize for this unspeakable breach of conduct, sir. The room fell dead silent. Hayes's jaw dropped. The smug, arrogant grin melted off his face, replaced by a mask of utter, paralyzing horror. He looked from Brady, saluting a man in a flannel shirt, down to the leather ID case sitting on the desk. Jenkins took a physical step backward, bumping into the doorframe. General David Carter slowly lowered his hands. He did not return the salute. He looked at Sergeant Brady, then shifted his gaze to the pale, trembling form of Officer Mitchell Hayes. Officer Hayes, David said, his voice soft, cold, and utterly lethal. You asked me if I had a job. David took a slow step forward. Hayes shrank back, instinctively retreating from the sheer, overwhelming presence of the man. My job, David continued, is to oversee the deployment, training, and operational readiness of 1.4 million active duty service members. My job is to protect the Constitution of the United States from all enemies, foreign and domestic. David stopped inches from Hayes. From tonight, Officer Hayes, David whispered, his eyes boring into the young cop's soul. You have proven yourself to be a domestic enemy to the very citizens you swore to protect, and I am going to dismantle your career, piece by piece. The silence in the precinct was deafening. The only sound was the harsh hum of the fluorescent lights and the ragged, panicked breathing of Officer Mitchell Hayes. He backed away from General David Carter until his spine hit the edge of the booking counter. Sir, I didn't know, Hayes stammered, his previous bravado entirely evaporated, replaced by the pathetic whimper of a bully who had finally picked the wrong victim. It was dark. Your truck, it was a standard protocol stop. Just a misunderstanding, General. A misunderstanding? David's voice was dangerously calm, echoing with decades of commanding troops in the world's most hostile environments. A misunderstanding is a clerical error, Officer Hayes. Falsifying a traffic violation, conducting an illegal search, fabricating a DUI charge, and physically assaulting a compliant citizen is not a misunderstanding. It is a crime. David turned his attention back to the desk. Sergeant Brady, my personal effects. Brady scrambled to push the metal tray across the counter. Yes, General. Right here, sir. David ignored the loose change and his keys. He picked up his personal cell phone. He dialed a secure number, putting the phone on speaker and setting it down on the counter. The line rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. "Command post, Major Weston speaking." "Major, this is General Carter," David said. "Go ahead, sir. Are you secure?" "Negative," David replied evenly. "I am currently at the Crestview Police Department. I have been unlawfully detained and assaulted by local officers. You are to contact the Department of Justice immediately. Furthermore, wake up FBI Director Christopher Wray. Tell him I need agents from the Civil Rights Division down here before sunrise. Finally, dispatch my security detail to this location." "Copy that, General." Major Weston's voice immediately hardened. "Federal assets and your detail are being mobilized. ETA is 20 minutes. The call clicked off. Jenkins, who had been hovering near the door, let out a slow, terrified breath. "Oh, God," he whispered. He knew that the involvement of the FBI and Christopher Wray meant this was no longer a local issue. The federal government was about to descend upon their sleepy, corrupt precinct like a hammer. "General, please," Hayes begged, his voice cracking, tears welling in his eyes. "You're going to ruin my life. I have a family." "You should have thought of them before you decided to use your badge as a weapon," David responded coldly. "You target people who look like me because you assume we have no voice and no power. Tonight, you found the exception." 20 minutes later, the screech of tires echoed through the back alley. The precinct doors burst open. Half a dozen heavily armed men in dark suits and tactical gear flooded the room. They were General Carter's personal security detachment, and their weapons were drawn. Following closely behind them was the chief of the Crestview Police Department, Robert Dempsey, who had clearly been dragged out of bed. He was hastily tucking a wrinkled uniform shirt into his trousers, his face flushed and sweating profusely. "General Carter!" Chief Dempsey gasped, rushing forward, completely ignoring his own officers. "Sir, words cannot express my absolute horror. I am Chief Dempsey. If you will just step into my office, we can sort this out quietly. I will personally see to it that these officers are suspended without pay." David didn't move. He looked at the chief with a gaze that could cut glass. "There will be no quiet resolution, Chief Dempsey. Your officers operate with impunity because your leadership allows it. The rot in this department stops tonight." By 3 a.m., the Crestview Police Department had been completely taken over. Black federal SUVs surrounded the building. Agents from the FBI's Civil Rights Division were already seizing hard drives, pulling dashcam footage, and securing the locker room. The Department of Justice had officially opened a sweeping federal probe into the town's policing practices. Officer Mitchell Hayes and Officer Ryan Jenkins were no longer wearing their badges. They sat in the interrogation rooms, not as officers of the law, but as federal suspects. When the FBI agents reviewed the dashcam and bodycam footage from the cruiser, they heard every racist remark, every fabricated charge, and every threat Hayes had made. Chief Dempsey was forced to resign by dawn, realizing that trying to protect his corrupt officers had ultimately destroyed his own career. The town of Crestview, long shielded by its wealth and exclusionary practices, was suddenly thrust into the national spotlight, exposed for the prejudice it had harbored for decades. General David Carter did not stay to watch them grovel. Once he had given his official statement to the federal investigators, he retrieved his keys and his loose change. His security detachment offered to drive him back to Washington in an armored convoy, But David declined. He walked out of the precinct, breathing in the crisp morning air. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow over the suburban streets. He walked over to his father's battered 1998 Ford F-150. David climbed into the cab, the familiar scent of old leather and motor oil grounding him. He rubbed his sore wrists, a lingering reminder of the night's injustice. But as he turned the key and the old V8 engine roared to life, he felt a profound sense of purpose. He had spent his entire life fighting enemies overseas to protect the freedoms of his country. Tonight, he had fought a battle on American soil, ensuring that the uniform of law enforcement could not be used as a shield for bigotry. He shifted the truck into drive and pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward the highway. The road ahead was long, but as the rising sun illuminated his path, General David Carter drove on, a quiet guardian ensuring that justice, however delayed, would always be served. General Carter's story is a powerful reminder that true authority isn't about the badge you wear, but the integrity you carry. Prejudice and abuse of power can hide in the quietest towns, but justice will always shine a light in the dark. If this story of resilience, courage, and ultimate justice moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with your friends to spread the message, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life stories of heroes walking among us.